The name of our podcast, TechSequences, is really a mashup of two words, technology and consequences. We are fascinated by the consequences, intended or unintended, of the internet and related technologies for the way we live, play, and work. We are your hosts, Leslie Daigle and Alexa Rod. We started our careers at the dawn of the internet and have been friends, colleagues, and comrades in arms for the better part of 20 years. In this podcast, we examine the impact internet-related technologies have made or may make in our lives. I'm Alexa Rod.
And I'm Leslie Daigle.
Welcome to TechSequences. We inherently assume that digital marketplace is egalitarian, that a small business in Louisiana can thrive online as easily as a multinational in Seattle. But this assumption is being dismantled by an asymmetric war. The human speed defense of small business is being obliterated by the warp speed offense of AI-driven cybercrime. The crisis begins with a resource gap. While large enterprises deploy 24/7 security centers and AI models, small businesses are fighting forest fires with a garden hose. According to the 2025 Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, while ransomware figures into roughly 39% of all breaches across all sectors, it accounts for a staggering 88% of all incidents targeting small and medium-sized businesses. For the little guy, ransomware isn't just a possible threat. It is the primary weapon of choice. In other words, what large companies treat as a cost of doing business is, for the small enterprise, a business-ending expense. For example, IBM and SecureFrame research show the average breach cost for small firms reached $3.31 million in 2025. With thin margins, this kind of loss can mean business closure. In fact, ElectroIQ suggests 60% of small businesses shut down within 6 months of a significant attack. This is exacerbated by the awareness trap. Off-the-shelf software and occasional training are shallow defenses against AI. When Sentinel-1 reports that GenAI-crafted phishing can increase click rates by 54%, a 15-minute training video is useless. We are asking humans to be firewalls against an automated tide, one they are mathematically destined to fail. The threat also includes a delivery gap. Operating on consumer-grade hardware and under-secured third-party vendors, small businesses form the global economy's soft underbelly. A hit to a small provider can compromise entire networks, yet they are the least equipped to handle the legal and forensic fallout. As the velocity of AI-enabled attacks outstrip our ability to respond, only giants can afford the entry fee for security. We will have a landscape composed of a few protected fortresses and vast open areas of vulnerable entities. To avoid this, we are at a strategic crossroads. Should we lean into the scale of big tech, centralizing our defense within the secure but proprietary ecosystems of the world's largest platform providers? Should we look to the government to set the pace, using regulation and national mandates to enforce a baseline of security for all? Do we continue to follow an organic patchwork of security solutions, in effect, accepting that security will be determined by individual need, capacity, and available resources? Or is there another path? The internet was born from the rough consensus and running code of the IETF, a decentralized, multi-stakeholder approach that transformed a fragmented experience into a global utility. But in an era where AI supercharges a threat, can radical collaboration scale to protect 400 million vulnerable targets? Is a unified defense even possible in an era of digital sovereignty? Who is ultimately responsible for the immune system of the web? And how do we ensure that the small business, the backbone of our economy, isn't just collateral damage in an automated war?
Our guest today is Brian Cute. Brian is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Global Cyber Alliance. He is a respected voice in internet governance and cybersecurity, bringing leadership experience from Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, the nonprofit coordinating the Internet's technical infrastructure, and the Public Interest Registry, the nonprofit managing the .org top-level domain. Throughout his career, Brian has engaged with communities around the world to understand how they access the internet and discover what is important to them when they go online. This experience helps drive GCA's mission to make the internet safer through collaboration, tackling problems no single organization can solve alone, and delivering practical tools to those most at risk. Also, to be completely transparent, my day job is at the Global Cyber Alliance, and Brian and I have been working together there for the last several years. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Alexa. Happy to be here.
So, for those who are unfamiliar with the Global Cyber Alliance, can you please just first introduce GCA? What is it? What's the mission? And what kinds of issues has GCA been working on?
So, Global Cyber Alliance is a nonprofit. We operate globally. We work through collaboration. That's a theme that I'll come back to in our conversation today. We aim to address the types of cybersecurity problems that no single organization can solve on their own. And we work through collaboration and coordination to provide resources and tools to those most at risk.
So, GCA has made protecting the world's small businesses and NGOs a core pillar of its mission. Why and how are these specific entities currently at greater disadvantage than they were even 2 years ago?
Well, I couldn't agree more with Alexa's framing of the problem at the outset. When I talk about it in our industry circles, Leslie, as you know, I tend to use pretty stark language about the threat that faces us. But Alexa's spot on. That framing is exactly what small businesses are facing, what they're up against. And, the cavalry is not riding to the rescue yet. And that's what we need to focus on is how do we get the protections that they need into their hands at scale? It's the primary problem that we have to address in that domain.
So one of the big worries is that these agentic frameworks are really hyperscaling the criminal activity. They are able to launch very sophisticated attacks at volume and a velocity we haven't really seen before. From your perspective, are we keeping up on the defensive side of AI? And if we're not, then why not?
No, we're definitively not keeping up. And it's for a number of reasons. Let me start with the threat to add some context to what you framed up, Alexa, at the beginning. Last September, I was at a security briefing in Singapore that was hosted by MasterCard, and Interpol and law enforcement agencies from the Southeast Asian region were all in attendance and sharing data about the threats coming from scam centers in Southeast Asia. So yes, cyber criminals have leveraged Gen AI to the hilt already to lower their cost of doing business, to drive upticks in volume of attacks across the board and globally. But the scam centers provide a really useful focal point to understand the nature of this threat and the dimension of this threat. So what started out as small compounds a few years back have grown into the size of small cities. They are in areas of Southeast Asia that jurisdictionally are kind of gray zones in Myanmar and Thailand. And these scam centers have grown to the size of small cities. They are being run by transnational organized crime. This is no longer somebody in a basement or a couple people in a building in Nairobi. This is transnational organized crime that's running these effective small cities that deliver scams and phishing attacks on a daily basis. A really dark side of these operations is that they're actually engaged in human trafficking as well. They have been systematically luring young adults into thinking they're in the middle of a job interview and coming to Thailand to have a final interview and being put in buses and driven to these compounds and effectively imprisoned as indentured workers. And you pointed to one data point that I think is truly shocking, which is the click-through rates, right? So that's just one important data point for people to focus on. In a matter of just a few years, these scam centers, by increases in volume and adding deep fake technology to their scams and to their phishing exploits, have achieved a 54% click-through rate. That is a business engine, right? What people need to understand is this is a business that's growing, thriving, scaling. It's organized and it's global. That's what we're up against. And that's what explains what's been happening in the last couple of years. What I heard in that briefing that really made me pause was one of the law enforcement organizations observed that they expect within 2 years or less that these scam cities, these scam centers, will be operating fully agentic systems, families of AI agents that work together to develop increasingly effective, higher volume scam and phishing attacks 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. For me, I've shared with other people, I've been in 2 briefings in my entire career that made my blood run cold, and that was one of them. I had to take about an hour after that day and just sit and process what I'd heard, because what that translates into, if you think about it, is in the next 2 years or so, we're literally going to be hit with a tsunami in terms of volume of more effective deepfake technology that is constantly improving, more effective scam and phishing attacks. And small businesses, there's 400 million or so, as you say, around the world. I will add 10 million NGOs who play critical roles in their societies who are largely defenseless. They're sitting ducks. This is the threat. This is what's coming. This is the timeline. And those end users are exposed. That's the reality we face today.
As you're describing it, it is a full-on industry. It's an industry that's, in growth mode, but these are businesses without a storefront, so to speak, right? I mean, it's not like there are roving bands of people carrying this out in different cities where they can be tracked physically. This is invisible, swaths of invisible activity that is attacking people across the globe, 24/7. So it's a difference in scale. It's a difference in in impact, and there are no jurisdictions that are fully responsible for addressing it. And with all that, so the Global Cyber Alliance as an organization has been around for over a decade. It has been for a long time promoting toolkits to address cyber hygiene, promoting things like strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, scam awareness. So does AI make these basics more important, or does it render them obsolete in the face of this whole tsunami of attacks?
I would argue that it makes them more important. And the primary directive for us is to get them in the hands of those end users at scale and speed. And it's going to require a global collective effort to achieve that. But more important, and I think one of the conundrums that I see is that the promise of AI and what it can do is remarkable. The promise of automating cyber defense is real, right? And there are many that are signaling that that is possible and achievable, and it's going to happen. But what I worry about is if people just default to, well, we can defend with AI, we can fix things with AI, and not understand that end users still have to have a basic awareness of what they're dealing with when they log on to the internet, a basic understanding of how their businesses can be compromised. I think we're missing the point altogether. There's still a need for awareness raising. There's still a need to get these basic cyber protection tools in the hands of these small businesses. The fact is we have to do it in a more automated fashion. We have to do it in a way that scales, but they need all of that if they're going to protect themselves and actually thrive and not become victims.
So I just want to underscore what I hear you saying is you're looking at AI not as a means of sort of an invisible perimeter and invisible defense, but rather a mechanism for empowering people, for getting tools into the hands of people so that they can protect themselves. Is that a fair characterization?
As an enabler. It's what we do today. So the way we deliver cyber protection today is what those in the international development sector would recognize as a train the trainer model of capacity building, right? It's a well-worn and proven method of getting whatever bit of education you need to get out to communities. It could be digital skills building, it could be other aspects, and it could be cybersecurity. And the way the train the trainer model works is it requires the collaboration of many, many organizations, and it takes a fair amount of time to deliver on the ground skills building. It's been effective. It's achieved some scale, but I'll give you a specific example. Right now in Global Cyber Alliance, we are in the middle of a basic cybersecurity capacity building project in 11 countries across Asia. And all told, at the end of 3.5 years, about 300,000 micro and small businesses will have received training on what are your cyber risks, what do you need to be aware of, how do you identify a risk, avoid a risk, and here's some tools you should download into your machines to provide protection. But it's going to take about 3.5 years. It's going to take the collaborative work of about 15 different organizations. It's going to take countless process steps and manual interventions to create the curriculum that's appropriate for these end users, to translate that, contextualize it, to train the master trainers, to have the master trainers train the trainers, and then have the trainers on the ground get the small businesses in the room and do the thing, right? It delivers. And don't get me wrong, 300,000 MSMEs now protected and aware is a remarkable outcome. It's a wonderful outcome. Let's go back to Alexa's framing. There's 400 million or so micro and small businesses on the planet. We've defined the threat that's coming at us in 2 years or less. And this model simply doesn't scale fast enough in the face of what cybercrime is doing. So we have to find another way.
So what is that other way? I mean, we talked a little bit about the awareness gap, and I guess the training helps with the awareness gap. There's the resource gap. How do they afford these tools? How do they know how to use them? And then there's the delivery. Where are they going to get these tools? How do they get these tools? It seems to me that a lot of the burden is right now on the small business, the medium-sized enterprise, to get this done. So what do you suppose, what are the pillars of getting this new model to work?
So let me start at the end of your question. Where do they find these tools? Well, they struggle with that. Look, a classic mindset of a micro or small business with respect to cybersecurity is A, they're either unaware of the problem entirely, or B, they may be aware of the problem, but they don't prioritize it because they're just a small business trying to, make bank at the end of the day and get to tomorrow and keep going. And they don't prioritize it as we'd like them to. And even if they know it's a problem, often an attitude is, well, it's not going to happen to me. And even if they had the awareness that we want them to, and the leaning forward curiosity, where do you find the tools, right? I mean, they could go on the internet and search, and there are plenty of free tools out there, but it's not easy, right? And then how do I trust that tool? How do I use that tool? That's the environment that they live in. And those are the attitudes and mindsets that they have. So the way that we've done it working with partners is we've follow the basic cyber hygiene principles. We put together a curated set of free tools that our technical team has tested that we know are fit and secure, fit for purpose and secure. And we reach out to them and engage with them through implementing organizations. So we bring them into a room. The engagement part is important. And that's where the awareness raising begins. But it's in that context that we make them understand the risk, help them identify it, understand what steps they can take with their team to avoid becoming a victim, and point them to tools that will plug their gaps. That's how it's done today. So it's not just awareness, it's awareness and engagement with small businesses. We need that piece of it. I believe strongly that where we can leverage AI to change the paradigm and to achieve scale is that process I just described of creating curriculum, of translating, contextualization, process steps, training the master trainer, training the trainers. I believe we can automate most of that. We can leverage AI to automate the delivery of the tools and the curriculum. We can automate the curriculum. We can automate to some degree the finding of the tools. I think if we leverage AI intelligently to automate those delivery pieces, we can create a solution that then can scale through new and broader distribution channels. And that's the challenge.
Let's talk about these distribution channels. What are you talking about when you say distribution channels? How would these, because GCA is just a not-for-profit, but you're dealing with global businesses. How do you reach them?
Well, I think current state is primarily small businesses and NGOs who receive this training are receiving it in the end through an organization like Mercy Corps, right, which is a large international NGO that has boots on the ground in a lot of different countries, that's already engaged in the activity of digital skills building, right? And so they are serving small businesses in many countries to get them online, to help them, thrive on the internet. So organizations like that are the ones that currently are the distribution system that have reach to the end users. And we work with and through them. The Asia Foundation is another. But those organizations, as they are, and with the reach that they have, it's not enough. We need companies like MasterCard, who's a partner of ours. We need organizations like web hosting companies, like domain name registrars, other commercial organizations that are actually serving small businesses online, delivering services to them, have a commercial relationship with them, to be willing to make these types of free tools available to small businesses. That's how we can expand the distribution channel. And that won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight. And you have to take into account, well, these are businesses. What are their business incentives to do this, or are there business incentives for them to do this? So there's going to be a number of issues we have to work through. But if we want to achieve protecting small businesses in the tens of millions, in the hundreds of millions, we have to broaden the distribution channel. And there are channels out there to leverage.
I appreciate that there are still some very big questions in terms of how to incentivize companies to engage, to play here. But I don't think it's all theoretical. I don't think it's all just philanthropic. I think there are broader scale business reasons why it is in the best interest of a larger organization to see smaller organizations continue to succeed. And I don't know if you can say a few words about that and make it really concrete in terms of, a large financial institution's interests.
Sure. Well, it comes down to business fundamentals, right? There's a word called churn, in any business online. You lose customers over time. You gain customers, you lose customers, you have churn. And one thing that, companies like to achieve and talk about is having sticky customers that keep coming back and re-upping their subscriptions or the services that you provide to them. There's another incentive that I see from the commercial perspective of, and I think, I don't want to speak for MasterCard, but we know them well enough, and they're one of the organizations that's made a really firm commitment. They understand that it's in their business interest. They want to serve small businesses with financial services. Small businesses get created every day, right? They come online, they're startups, and you want them to start up and get past that phase and grow and thrive. And any organization that sells services to them, it's in their interest that these organizations don't go out of business because of a ransomware attack, right? That they are protected, that they're able to grow and thrive. And that's a business opportunity to provide upsell services or other services as an organization grows and matures. So there's some basic business fundamentals and incentives, I think, for any company that's serving these types of organizations that's apparent. the question ultimately will be, will they act on that? Will they need other incentives to make these types of free basic services available to small and micro businesses? We'll see, but there are incentives and there are buttons to push.
Much of what you're talking about involves collaboration across multiple sectors. So collaboration amongst small businesses, some of the delivery networks, you said domain registrars, web hosting, but I presume also some governments as well, because this is a multinational type of landscape. But we are in an era where a lot of countries are pushing for digital sovereignty and localized data. Doesn't this collective action run contrary to what the trend seems to be?
I think it has a potential to introduce friction and possibly barriers to the global delivery of these types of services. Yes, I think the sovereignty issue is one that is top of mind for many governments, and we're seeing energy of governments leaning into, how do I create, a national network that is mine, ring fenced, protected, controlled to some degree. And I think, based on the work that you've done, Alexa, in the past, and Leslie, we all know here that's in the end not going to work well, or it's going to create some unintended bad consequences for the internet and the free flow of services. So yes, I think there's some potential that could introduce friction here. With respect to these types of basic cyber protections for micro and small businesses and NGOs, I think there's a fundamental governmental interest in this that could coexist with a strong sovereignty mindset, if that's what the government has. Look, how long have we been talking about AI creating massive dislocations in employment, right? How long have we been talking about the threat of AI, taking out small businesses at scale? It's in a government's national interest with respect to its economy, because small businesses make up, in most places, 80+% of the GDP, that their small businesses thrive and be protected. And I think that's an impulse that some governments will react to, and I hope they do, in terms of providing support or programmatic support for small businesses. Sovereignty, I can't predict how that will go. In the concept that we have about developing these types of basic cyber protection tools, ultimately this would be open source, right? There's a lot of value in creating open source repos with tools that people can take and fork and develop and localize themselves. And I think an open source approach may in some ways mitigate concerns about sovereignty in the extreme. If there's the ability for locals to, create, improve, localize, contextualize, control to some degree the delivery of those services to small businesses in their own countries.
One of the flip sides of hyperlocalization and the ability to work on open source is that things can get a little bit chaotic. Do we need to test the AI security systems before scaling them? And who then is the referee in deciding when the AI is safe enough for public use?
Without a doubt. We're all aware, everyone is aware of the risks associated with the technology, whether it's hallucinations, whether it's wrong responses, inaccurate responses, whether it's toxicity, exfiltration of PII. That's a big one. It's been demonstrated, right? And so if we're going to use this technology to build tools to put in the hands of end users, they absolutely have to be, as I like to repeat, fit for purpose and secure. You cannot put a cybersecurity tool in the hands of someone that ends up compromising that end user. That's death for your organization and your reputation, and that's the opposite result. So any tools developed by anybody leveraging AI to provide cyber protection, you have to test the security. You have to pilot, you have to test, you have to get feedback, you have to monitor the behavior of the LLM or the agent, and document it and iterate it and have safeguards in place to make sure that it won't compromise the end user at the end of the day. Who's responsible for that? Well, in the case of any organization that's seeking to offer those types of tools, it's on that organization, and its reputation is at stake, full stop, right? I think if governments end up getting interested in supporting these types of tools more programmatically for their country's small businesses, I would think that a government would have the interest in making sure that the security aspect of any tools would be validated to some degree. I don't know what that would look like. I'm the last person to promote regulation for regulation's sake, but I think there are clear incentives. But no, there's no one global AI, administrator who can be the last stop on, is this tool secure or not? That's going to be on everyone's shoulders.
So talk to us about the kinds of free tools and resources that are available from GCA and anywhere else that can help these small businesses and medium enterprises we've been talking about. What are these tools? How can they access them? How easy are they to implement?
Well, basic cyber hygiene talks about simple things, like doing an inventory of your network, access controls, software updates, having automatic software updates in place. We have tools like Quad9, which is a protective DNS service that'll prevent your machines from connecting with a known malicious domain address. It's those types of basic tools. And to be clear, in our domain of cybersecurity nonprofits, there are a lot who offer toolkits. And I just want to emphasize that I think one of the ways that GCA has distinguished itself is that we have always emphasized the importance of tools that you download into your devices and your network that provide operational protection. And that's really important from the standpoint of going back to your framing point, Alexa, which was we can make humans aware, we can help them understand what the risks are, how to spot them, and how to avoid them. But with the effectiveness of the threats that are coming, the human is going to fail, right? It's just going to happen. And that's not a judgmental statement. It's an inevitability. You're going to click on the wrong link. You're going to be deceived. You're going to be confused. So when the human fails, having some tools in the background that are providing operational protection are an important backstop. So we always emphasize the importance of using free tools to provide some basic cyber protection.
So sort of like having a seatbelt. You don't need the seatbelt if you aren't in a crash, but if you're in a crash, then you're not thrown out of the vehicle.
Absolutely. Yep. I mean, they didn't have seatbelts in wagons, but they do now in cars. And to use the analogy of velocity and speed, you need seatbelts in cars because it can reduce injuries and deaths and all the rest of it. If you want to talk about velocity, the one thing that's so impressive about AI in these very early days, or Gen AI, I should say, is the velocity of this technology, of its adoption, of its evolution. You saw the announcement from Anthropic yesterday or the day before about a model they're not releasing to the public because of it's so efficient at identifying software vulnerabilities and exploiting them. The velocity of this particular technology is really breathtaking. And it is a game of speed right now, which is why we have to, bad analogy, we have to get on our horses as a cyber defense community and start going at a faster speed. We have to start developing these tools collectively and start finding ways to get them in the hands of more end users. I think it took about roughly 30 years, and you both know this. I mean, you're in the industry from the beginning of time, like myself. It took about 30 years for the internet or internet access to reach half the population of the planet, right? That was achieved in 2018. The speed of AI by comparison is light speed. And God knows what the terrain's going to look like 12 months from now, right? So this is not hyperbole, right? I'm not engaging in hyperbole. We need to start collective defense efforts now for global protection. And that's going to take government, industry, civil society to come together and make this happen.
I have to say, I use a VPN I use a service that tries to clean out my information from the dark web. I mean, you name it, I do it. And yet, just recently, I've seen it's not keeping up. I've seen so many phishing attacks. It used to be that the phishing attack was ridiculous. It was some, weird Gmail address or whatever from Geek Squad, and I never used that service. Not that it's bad or anything, but now it's something that I might actually, in a moment of, being rushed, click on. So they're becoming so much more relevant and better. But so let's go back to sort of the 4 paths that we laid out. We said, okay, our paths are that we rely on big tech. They've invested a huge amount of money. Maybe we could just find some refuge in their, organizations. We can rely on government. We can, work together collaboratively. Tell me about the pros and cons of some of these. I mean, obviously, relying on government, it creates a baseline, but it may take a long time. But what other help us identify that and justify that really collaboration is the right way when compared to some of these other paths?
Well, I'm convinced it's the right way, and we have models of this type of collaboration in the past. The biggest model is ICANN, of course, and a multi-stakeholder model of governance or technical coordination, I should say, of internet resources. At GCA, Leslie leads an effort called Manners, which is focused on routing security and brings together 1,300 plus network operators, infrastructure providers to focus on, routing security issues and develop solutions. There are examples of collective action. I think what's important to start out is to recognize what each stakeholder's role is, and with clear eyes, understand what their respective incentives are, right? Commercial organizations have commercial incentives. That is what it is. The hyperscalers are a fact of life, and they are pushing and investing on the development of AI everywhere you look. Government, yes, absolutely has a role in this, without a doubt. The question is, which policy area, what's a priority, what's their role in collaboration, which raises interesting questions for government because they're not usually comfortable with collaborating as equals at the table because they're governments. And civil society. So if you're going to create some kind of a community of action around delivering tooling at scale to those who are most at risk and don't have the resources, each of those actors has to be at the table, playing their role. There has to be agreement. There has to be fundamental agreement about what the objective is. And then everyone coming to the effort in their own role with open eyes and contributing what's important. Not-for-profits and civil society actors can contribute a real important aspect around the ethos of why this community of action exists, which is in the public interest, right? This sort of collective action has to be in the public interest, in the global public interest. That's what nonprofits and civil society can reflect at the middle of this effort. And then you need industry and philanthropies who can be early stage funders and supporters of the development if it's in their respective interests and they recognize that. As you move into phase 2 and 3, where these things are scaling and governments are becoming more interested in AI's impact on their societies, governments should have an interest and perhaps support and funding mechanisms so these tools can be available to their citizens. It takes a lot of coordination. It takes a commitment to collaboration, but the internet exists because of agreement. If you boil it down, it works and exists because of agreement. There's really no stronger glue than that, which is remarkable. So when we think of communities of action, we have prior examples to point to. We know how they can function. We know they are able to deliver. And, where I would start is right now, let's just come to agreement on the need in the public interest for this sort of protection at scale and start from there.
So last thought to lead us out. Supposing for some value, we start now and foster this collective action, where do you want things to be in 3 years' time?
So to your earlier point about the security of the tools and ensuring that, that's going to take some time. This is the old conundrum of it's so frustrating, particularly in the cyber defense community. But when you're developing products and initiatives like this, you have to go slow to go fast in the end. So you can't skip anything that's important here. Developing, piloting, testing these types of tools with real end users, understanding how they're learning, working with an automated resource as opposed to a human, making sure they're learning what they need to learn, and testing the security, making sure the security is in place and that there are guardrails as before you start to scale this type of a tool or solution. That's going to take time. And that's going to take a year and a half of some pretty intensive tooling, piloting, and review. And then when you're at that juncture, now you're ready to start scaling. And this is where, in parallel, in maybe that first year and a half, those who are in a position to distribute this, the commercial actors, domain name registrars, web hosters, financial services providers, we've been talking to them, getting them in position, getting them comfortable with making these resources available. A year and a half or so, roughly, now you start to scale these tools if they're fit for purpose and secure. And, at the same time, bringing governments along so that they can provide longer term support, so they can prioritize this type of a need for their small businesses, for their economies, right? Again, small businesses are more than 80% of most GDP in most places, right? I see a progression like that, Leslie, over a 3-year frame. And it's going to take a lot of collaboration. It's going to take a lot of work and commitment. And I actually think it's achievable.
Time to roll up our sleeves and get to it then. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this TechSequences podcast. We are Leslie Daigle and Alexa Rod. You can reach us by email, techsequences@techsequences.org. We'd love to hear from you to know what you thought about this episode or ideas for future episodes. TechSequences. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook and subscribe through your favorite podcasting service.